Okay, that's okay. We can just go ahead. We'll just go ahead. Hello,
Okay.
everybody. Yeah.
So hello everybody. I'm going to assume that you can hear me. This is so new to me. Our techie guy, Will, has told me to tell you to go to speaker view, not gallery view. That will be easier for you. So hello everyone. My name is Lou Allison, as many of you know, and I work here at the Prince Rupert Library. June is National Indigenous History Month in Canada. Here at the library, we always showcase Indigenous reads in June. We have an extensive collection of items and resources that we put on display. We promote and feature Indigenous authors. We encourage book clubs to participate, including our own in-house book club. Last year at the end of the month, we held a very fruitful and eye-opening roundtable discussion about the books that people had read over that month. This year, because our building is closed, because of COVID-19 restrictions, we can't do any of that. But this is giving us the opportunity to try something new. This is our very first virtual author reading. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all and to welcome Michelle Good, the author of Five Little Indians. Michelle, for those of you who don't know, Michelle is of Cree ancestry and has worked with Indigenous organizations since her teens. Deciding to approach that work in a different way, in her early 40s, she obtained a law degree from UBC and practiced in the public and private sectors, primarily advocating for residential school survivors. She also holds a Master of Fine Arts degree in creative writing from UBC and has published poetry and short stories in numerous publications. An altogether very impressive CV. Her first novel, Five Little Indians, has been garnering a lot of attention and praise from critics, journalists, other writers, and readers alike. We are very excited to hear her read from her book and speak to us about it today. But just before I turn this over to Michelle, I would like to tell you a small anecdote about how the book came onto my radar. I live in the tiny community of Dodge Cove, and one of my neighbors is a lifelong friend of Michelle's since grade 2. Judy has been enthusiastically promoting Michelle's book and has involved a large portion of our village in reading it. And I know that some of my neighbors and friends are signed on watch today. So when you release a book into the world, you never know where a fan base might establish itself.
That's true.
So Michelle, to start, the cover of your book is stunning. And would you like to start by telling us about that?
Sure. The inside world of editing and publishing can be very intriguing, and when you're approaching it for the first time for a major publication like a novel, it's a learning experience, let me tell you. So I learned quite quickly that choosing the cover was not, I didn't get final say on the cover because it's considered part of promotion of the book and so on and so forth. So they sent me this draft cover to look at, and it was like, oh my God, it was hideous. That's the only thing I can say. It was orange and blue and this smattering of what looked like broken and sodden feathers. And I just said, no, please, could I have some work, and some artwork that is, more representative of the gravitas of the material that is in the book. So a while later, and the only thing I suggested was birch trees, because birch trees are a theme throughout the work. And so then they came back to me with this tremendously, incredibly beautiful cover. And I opened it, the JPEG, when they sent it to me, and I literally gasped because it's such a powerful piece of art. But beyond that, one of the things that happened during the course of writing Five Little Indians was my son passed away suddenly, and was obviously a very traumatic thing. And he died on the full moon, and he died on the pink moon. And when I saw this, I just thought, Oh my God, I know that he was standing behind the author or behind the artist and saying, get the moon in there now, make it pink. So my mom will know I'm here. And it's made me feel like he is a part of this, and he's here with me on this, this amazing journey that we're venturing on with this book. So I'd like to thank Lou for inviting me. I'd certainly like to thank Judy for her tireless promotion of my work, and I appreciate the opportunity, and I hope that we can see these things happening more and more with lots of talented Indigenous writers that are out there these days. So I thought that I would start with a little reading, and then we can have some questions. I can talk about how I came up with these people and those kinds of things, but why don't we jump right into the book first and just, and I had them all marked so nicely, and now I've lost where I was going to start, but we can start with a reading and then we'll go from there. Sound good?
Sounds great.
All right. Now this is, there are 5 characters for those of you that I can see on the screen. Can you raise your hand if you've already read the book? Because I don't want to give away secrets. Okay. Thank you. So this is chapter 5, and it's about Lucy, and it's after she's been in the city for a while. She works at a flea bag motel known as the Manitou Motel. The name of the motel was chosen very carefully. There is, in fact, a Manitou Motel in Saskatchewan. But for those of you that don't know the word Manitou, actually it's Kisi Manitou in Cree is God, or the creator. And so I wanted to have the creative force watching over my poor little kids as they struggled in that terrible place. So anyway, this is about Lucy shortly after, well, quite a while after she's been living in the city. There was a time of day just past 3 when the Manitou Motel didn't look like a crime scene. Swept clean of grimy evidence, its early 1950s facade seemed almost family friendly. Lucy liked the Manitou in the afternoon, buffed up and almost shiny for a few hours, before nightfall and the inevitable onslaught of customers rendered it unrecognizable again, under a layer of empty bottles or overflowing ashtrays and mangled linens. She nodded in satisfaction, the beds neatly made, the bathroom porcelain gleaming, the towels artfully folded as though by some magic she wouldn't be wading through the fetid mess again the next morning. Daydreaming, Lucy walked straight into Clara as they both reached for the door to the linen closet. Hey, Clara bumped her with a swing of her hip and held the door for her. They shrugged off their smocks and punched their time cards by rote, the sudden darkness of the windowless room no longer a hindrance to their practiced hands. Tired and ready to leave the Manitou to its ghosts, they sauntered into the sunlight. It's your big day tomorrow, Lucy, right? Yep. You scared? Nope. I'm going to pass that test. It's not the same as if you go right through the high school, but it's kind of the same as grade 12. What would sister think now? She waved her hand as though swatting a fly. Yeah, she'd probably faint, the old bitch. The 2 girls snickered at the thought of Sister Mary fainting dead away at the news of her success. You know what day it is today? Clara shook her head. You mean other than Thursday? What? 2 years ago since Maisie died. The girls walked in silence, finding no words. Lucy turned to her friend as they approached Chong Lee's. Hey, you want to come up for a cola? There's some I just got a new 45, Ruby Tuesday too. No, I can't. I promised Liz I'd meet her at Woolworth's. I sure hope she shows up tomorrow. She promised she would cover for me. Yeah, but you know Liz and her promises. She better show, because I sure don't want to be doing all those extra rooms. Lucy touched her friend's shoulder. I'll come straight back to the Manitou after the test, and if she doesn't show, I'll take over. Hey, don't worry. Just think about your test. Do us proud. Lucy turned into the alleyway and the small alcove that led to the apartment over Chong Lee's. She laughed, fishing in her purse for her keys. See you tomorrow. Yeah, we'll go and celebrate. Just then Lucy looked down the alley and stood motionless, keys pointed towards the door, as she watched a guy walking away. There was something about his frame, The way he moved as he disappeared down the alley, the tilt of his head strangely familiar. She shrugged and slipped the key into the lock. Pull, lift, and turn the key simultaneously, and the old sticky lock would open. Otherwise, she might as well try abracadabra. It was almost 2 years now since she'd laid all her money but for $2 on Chong Li's counter in return for the key to the apartment upstairs. She couldn't get the door open and had to go back to the store to ask him to open it for her. His English getting worse and worse with frustration, he opened the door with an irritated flourish, grumbling his way back to the store. She could have taken over Maisie's apartment after she died. The landlord even offered her the place. She chose this apartment instead for its low rent and proximity to the Manitou. Besides, there was just too much sadness filling every corner at Maisie's place. Lucy didn't allow thoughts of her very often. She didn't understand how Maisie could have been so full of despair. The cops had come to the door, then took Lucy to the morgue to identify her lifeless body. Yes, it was Maisie. Beautiful, brave Maisie. My kids. I haven't been back to this part for a while. You'll have to excuse me. Even though the other girls told Lucy over and over again not to blame herself, she felt sure it was her fault. So she tried not to think of Maisie alone in a corner of the graveyard for the destitute and abandoned. Lucy pushed the thoughts away and stepped inside the apartment. She changed into her new bell-bottoms and matching paisley blouse and stood in front of the open fridge barefoot. The ancient linoleum was cool respite for her feet, which were hot and tingling after a long day. Her fridge was empty except for a dozen eggs, a package of toaster tarts, and 3 bottles of pop. The light blazed with so few contents to block the rays of the bulb. She pulled out a bottle of pop, held it against the counter edge, and popped the lid off with the base of her hand. She guzzled half the bottle at once, gasping from the fizz of it. She took her place at the kitchen table, placing both palms on the textbook. A familiar nervousness rose in her, constricting her throat. She pushed the textbook away and instead of studying, emptied every cupboard, the small counter piled with dishes and dry goods. Already spotless, she nonetheless wiped every inch of the cupboard interiors and carefully placed their contents back inside, only to empty the cupboards again and again, each time reordering the contents, this time by size, this time by brand name, this time by shape. In the evenings, the Manitou's neon sign filled her kitchen with a soft red light. She often sat at her kitchen table, smoking, calm in the red hue, even though it reminded her from time to time of the illuminated exit sign in the dorm. Sometimes she wondered if it was there just to taunt them, to remind them there was no exit, no escape. Finally exhausted, she closed the cupboard doors. She gazed out the window at the Manitou. The hookers were just starting to trickle in. They carried their haughty promises in their bearing, swinging their hips, hanging provocatively on the arms of the Johns as they headed for the rooms at the Manitou. She would also see them emerge later, more subdued and adjusting their clothes, folding money into their bras or shoes. Not long after her arrival in Vancouver, Lucy quit her evening ritual of rolling the giant pink curlers in her hair and securing them against her scalp with the bobby pins she'd brought with her from the mission school. She was mesmerized by the hippie girls who sometimes wandered away from 4th Avenue into the downtown core. She saw their white pink lipstick, dramatic coal eyes, and long straight hair, shiny and swaying, unhindered by the brittle freeze of hairspray. In the years since Lucy's departure from the mission, her hair had grown past her shoulder blades. She thought it grew faster now that it was free of sister's temper and her well-used razor. She replaced her rat tail comb with a boar bristle brush and her hairspray with herb-smelling shampoo. She watched the hippie girls living with a freedom that came naturally without anything or anyone to fear or resist. She wondered if they could even imagine a life without such abandon. Sometimes Lucy had to remind herself that no one was watching her, waiting to pounce. A turbulent river of exhilaration ran beneath her quiet demeanor with the realization that her choices were now her own. Lucy sighed and pulled the textbook toward her and read it aloud in a whisper, as though sound would seal the information in her head. The next afternoon, Lucy walked into the Manitou parking lot, waving as Clara caught sight of her and raced towards her. Well, come on, Clara grabbed her elbow. Tell me, how did it go? Lucy hung her head, disappointment heavy in her step. Liz, close on Clara's heels, swallowed her words as Clara turned and whispered to her, don't say anything. I don't think she made it. The girls reached out to hug Lucy. It's okay, Lucy. You can try again. Clara patted her on the shoulder. Psych! Lucy laughed as she pulled her exam paper from her purse and pointed to the red circled B+. The girls jumped and shouted their delight at her success. Liz hugged her so hard Lucy could barely breathe as Clara danced around them laughing. Well, maybe one of us will get out of this hellhole, Clara sighed, not used to laughing so hard when sober. Lucy smiled at her friends. We'll celebrate tonight. My treat. All right. Clara reached for Lucy's test paper and held it out above her. You should have this framed. She turned to get Liz's approval and caught Harlan out of the corner of her eye, stepping out of the office door and striding towards the parking lot toward them. Uh-oh, here comes Hitler. The girls started towards the linen room, but not fast enough. Harlan caught them off and grabbed Lucy by the wrist. And where the hell have you been? I'm docking your pay. Fuck you, Harlan. I told you I had to write my test this morning. I told you Clara was going to cover for me. I don't know what you think you're trying to prove. You Indian chicks are good for two things, and both of them happen in motel rooms. He grabbed her test and threw it on the ground. You think this is going to make a difference? Now get the fuck to work. Fuck you, Harlan. I quit. The words were out of her mouth before she even knew what she was saying. You can't quit. You're fired, you ungrateful bitch. Collect your shit and get the fuck out of here. Lucy stood unmoving under the garish neon sign of the Manitou, rage and exhilaration rushing through her like two rivers colliding. Ungrateful? You should be grateful we don't report you to the health department. Later, the girls would laugh about what happened next and talk about it for years to come. But in that moment, both Liz and Lucy were left standing, stunned, as Clara, with a raging scream, pounced on Harlan's back, her wiry legs wrapped around his waist, punching him in the back of the head and yelling at the top of her lungs. Everyone knew Clara had a hair-trigger temper in situations like these, when things were just plain wrong. Later, they decided that Harlan should have known better. You fucking bastard, you're ruining her best day ever. Clara rode Harlan like some violent piggyback ride, punching him in the face and head as he swatted at her, hunching and twisting, desperately trying to throw her off his back. He circled and circled, arms flying as Clara clung to him with one arm and pummeled him with the other. Lucy watched wide-eyed until she and Liz jumped in, prying Clara loose. Harlan then took a swing and Clara flew through the air, landing on her ass on the pavement. The two girls threw themselves between Harlan and Clara as in a daze. She struggled to stand. Wiping the blood from the corner of his mouth, Harlan waved his fingers at the girls. You're all fired. Now get the fuck off the property. And you, Lucy, tell your deadbeat boyfriends to stay the hell away from my lobby. You just had to wreck everything like you always do, didn't you? Clara brushed herself off. I'm getting my stuff, and if you want to try and stop me, well, go ahead. Head high, Clara limped towards the linen room to get her things. Liz and Lucy walked backwards behind her, watching Harlan twitch in their direction. Clara emerged with her few possessions, and all three girls headed down the street, the shadow of the Manitou shimmering over them. I'm so sorry, you guys. I didn't mean for you to lose your jobs, Lucy said, on the verge of tears. Ah, to hell with him, Clara muttered. He needs us more than we need him. Who else would work in that dive? You watch. Tomorrow morning, he'll be trying to track us down to come back to work. Forget him. This is your big day. Let's go party. Well, I'm not going back. Lucy pulled her test paper out again, wrinkled and dirty from the tussle with Harlan. This will find me something better. Liz, what did he mean, that thing about my boyfriends? I don't even have a boyfriend. I was going to tell you, but what with Muhammad Ali over here, I didn't get a chance. Tell me what? Lucy could feel an awful nervousness taking over her. Some guy came into the Manitou today looking for you. He told Harlan you two were friends. I guess someone told him you worked here. Harlan told him to take a hike. What guy? Lucy shrugged. I don't know any guys. I didn't see him. I just heard Harlan giving him the boot. Put some lipstick on. Let's go have fun. You did it. Lucy reached into her purse and applied her lipstick as she walked, a little smug, knowing the white pink frosted tone looked much better on her than on those hippie girls. She didn't give the stranger another thought. So there's that. So are there some questions there, Lou, or no?
I don't know if I'm supposed to see questions. I thought we would maybe do questions at the end.
Oh, okay.
One thing though about Maisie. Maisie's story was very affecting to those of us in Dodge Cove who met to discuss the book. And one person had a hard time reading past that because it was difficult for her. Yeah. So it's quite moving to see that it moves you as well.
Oh, and you know, it's really interesting because I made a decision to write this book. That's why I actually went to do the Masters of Fine Arts, and because I had my law practice then still, and I was very busy. And so I needed to have something that would force me to structure my life so that there was writing time and that I had to make progress and move forward with it. But the decision, and as Lou was saying when she was introducing me, is most of my work in law was representing residential school survivors. And one of the things that I experienced over and over and over again was hearing the response from, you know, various officials with the Department of Justice and just in society generally. Why can't they just get over it? It's history. Why can't they just get over it? And so I thought, well, let me tell you why they can't just get over it. And, you know, this, the kind of harms that were done to hundreds of thousands of Indigenous children through the residential school programs, and you know, it was mandatory in the Indian Act that kids had to go. It still resonates today. We still see it through the generations today. And this is why, you know, this is why they can't get over it, because it's such a fundamental harm that is resting with people and is passed on. I mean, you think even if you take away all of the abuse that was involved in what these children experienced, even if all that ever happened to them was that they were taken away from their parents, this is quite enough, okay? Not only were they taken away, they were forcefully taken away. And they saw in that experience that their parents couldn't protect them. And so who can you possibly ever trust in your life again when this has happened to you, when you can never, ever really feel safe again? And so I just thought that this was a safe way. And I know that it's really key to get past the Maisie chapter, because I do think there's a balance of hope, as well as the articulation of suffering in the book. But, you know, suicide rates of Indigenous people are much higher than non-Indigenous people in Canada. Incarceration rates of Indigenous people are 30% of incarcerated populations are Indigenous people, while Indigenous people make up 5% of the overall Canadian population. So, you know, these realities are realities. And I just felt that there has been such a tremendous amount of work that's been done in academia, in government, you know, through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and, you know, the efforts of various you know, aspects of universities and governments to indigenize their operations and so on. But I think that those works can be threatening to people, accusatory in nature, or people feel defensive about them because they're official. Whereas this is a work of fiction, this is storytelling. And one of the most effective ways, I believe, in the world to communicate an idea, a reality, a thought is through telling a story. So that's what I did. And in terms of how these characters came to me, I didn't start with knowing that I was going to have 5 characters. I started with the idea that I wanted to communicate why this still resonates through through our reality as we know it. And so what I started doing was I just started documenting or writing experiences that are, you know, it's in the public domain. People know what happened in these schools now. And I started documenting those, just writing them down. And then thinking, and sort of in my creative brain as opposed to my legal brain, about what kind of person grows, what kind of human being develops when they've experienced these kinds of abusive experiences. And, you know, so we see Lucy with her obsessive compulsive behavior, right? We see the addictions issues. We see the self-loathing and the inability to feel good about one's accomplishments. We see all of those kinds of things that come from the sexual, physical, psychological abuse of children. I'm just reading a question. This is from Sheila to everybody. Michelle, I haven't read the book, but I think I saw that the 5 people were released from the residential school and had nowhere to go. I know only that I know so little. We all do. But I thought most were returned to their homes, even though their families were by then perfect strangers. Did both of those outcomes occur? Yes, they did. One of the really interesting things that happened with the placement of students in residential schools is that they weren't always, there were people from the far north that were placed in Vancouver Island. There were people, you know, from British Columbia that ended up in Edmonton. They were not necessarily placed in schools that were close to their homes, and often they lost track. And, you know, some of these kids got to go home. And in the book, there is representation of kids that actually got home, either through escaping and finding, you know, finding their own way home. But some people, their parents had passed away. The other victim of the residential school is the community at large. And this is something that I feel very strongly about, is that it wasn't, we as Indigenous people did not just experience this on an individual basis, we experienced it on a collective basis, right? What is the role of the current generation? The current generation's job is to bring along the next generation. So what do you do in a community? And in one of Kenny's chapters, we address this, or this is part of his experience in the book. And I've got a train coming, so don't mind the train sounds. Imagine a community where there's no children. There's only babies, because once they get to 5 or 6, off they go. And off they go as a matter of law. And to have no children in the community, to have no purpose, to be deprived of your primary purpose in the world, to bring along the next generation. Parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles, everybody suffered from this experience. Not only the children who experienced the abuse firsthand. There's a story in here. I won't read this particular part, but there's a story that I was told that is actually true, that's represented in this book, and it's Maisie, actually, and how after 10 years, so going back to my comment about sometimes they were very, very far away, so sometimes they wouldn't see their parents for the full 10 years that they were in the school. And so there's this one story that's represented in the book where Maisie is from a remote coastal village far north, and she and several others are returned home by boat, and they're all milling on the beach, and none of them recognize their parents. They don't recognize their mother, they don't recognize their father, and they're trying to reconnect with these people who basically are strangers to each other now. So in addition to the individual personal experience, you see the experience of the parents, and you see the experience, the breakdown of the community as a result. Hi, Mabel. Yeah. So what Mabel has to say to everybody. Mabel, can I see you on the screen? Let's see. There you are. Hi, Mabel. So what Mabel says, because I don't know who else can see this, I remember that experience firsthand when all the kids were taken from my village. I was the youngest of 7 kids and suddenly was an only child, right? So even the little ones that are left behind, right, before it's their turn, the whole dynamic of the family has changed, right? You know, either you suddenly become the adult child or else you become an only child, and the entire dynamic changes, right? Much less, I know how deeply I loved my child, and just the notion of him being taken and to have no recourse, right? To simply have no recourse because Section 14 of the Indian Act says this is how it works. These kids are going to go, period, the end. So, did you have to go, Mabel? I'm glad. I'm glad. Okay, so here is from Rupert Outreach to everyone. Michelle, did you start out with a hierarchy of your characters in your mind in terms of importance to you and their place in the book overall? And if so, did it change by the time you finished it? Oh. Well, I think I mentioned that I started with Kenny, okay? And let me just tell you that this book looks nothing like the first draft, okay? The first draft is always a first draft, and nobody ever expects or shouldn't expect to have a first draft published. The process of working it and finding how it's going to, how it's going to be best balanced and best told is a very, very challenging job, especially when you're an idiot like me and you take on for your first novel 5 protagonists, right? It was a real challenge. Kenny was the first character, and one other character, Lucy, came in relation to Kenny, but there wasn't really a hierarchy. Like I was saying earlier, what I did was I took experiences, and I took, sort of, I guess they're kind of, what's the word? It'll come to me any minute. An archetype of survivors, right? And there is Kenny, the alcoholic male who can't, despite loving people from, in the most deep possible way that he could, that he can't stay put. And one of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder is continually running, right? And, and the addictions are an ongoing issue that we see, plus sexual dysfunction. One of the things I know that made the Maisie chapter is tough, but one of the impacts of sexual abuse is actually, it's not just sexual abuse, it's with trauma generally. Trauma against the person is that people look to relive the trauma. They look to relive it because they keep hoping they're going to find a place that they can resolve it. And that's Maisie. Maisie was, and I think, Maisie only has 1 chapter in the book. And I think it was because it was just so hard to write that. It was painful. It was very, very painful for sure. And I'll tell you a little anecdote. I'm sure your name isn't Rupert Outreach, but I will tell you a little anecdote. After I had done everything that I felt I could do in terms of writing this book, I sent it off to one of my professors at the UBC Creative Writing Department that I had maintained a relationship with. And I asked her if I could hire her to do a manuscript evaluation for me, and she did. And she explained to me, you know, what I'd get for my money, and that I could expect about 20 pages of notes and, you know, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, you know, eventually time, you know, a little time passed and I got an email from her, you know, and I'm going, yes, you know, feedback is here, yay. And I opened it up and I looked and it was like half a page of notes. And I'm thinking, what the hell? And she said, this is really simple. You need to cut the first 5 chapters.
Oh, wow. Ouch.
What? But she was absolutely right. And it's something that happens with a lot of writing, is that you write into your subject, right? Like you WRITE, write into your subject. And she said, I don't want you to get rid of the information that you have there, but this is where your book starts. She said, I think your book starts here at chapter 6. And I said, well, okay. So another year passed as I struggled to restructure the book so in such a major way. I mean, it was a simple fix, but it was a major amount of work to take all that information and to reweave it into the other chapters. So, but yeah, my intent was to tell stories, or a story about these survivors after they left the school. There's lots of, you know, memoir, and there's lots of individual stories about what happened in the schools. What I wanted was, how did it impact? What happened after? What were the roadblocks that happened after? And so that's where Marilyn, that's the mentor who helped me with this, took me to, well, then go, start there right at the point where they leave. And so that's what we did. And but yeah, it took a full year to you know, sort of weave all of those in. And so I hope that answers your question, not Rupert Outreach. Let's see what you've got here. Okay. Ooh, all right. So now here is from Emerald, who is my friend. And Emerald is a lawyer in Prince Rupert. And Emerald and I went to law school. She says, you were already a well-educated, highly literate person before you began the book. Why did you feel it necessary to do the MFA? Do you recommend that to people who want to write a novel? It was very unique to my circumstance in that I was working so hard. Sometimes I was doing like 13 hearings. One time I did 13 hearings in 20 days. And I knew, you know, I'm not getting any younger. I'm going to be 25 next week, right? And so I thought, no, I just have to find a way that I can not only learn how to write a novel, because, you know, there is some skill to writing a novel, but to have the time in my schedule. And so that way I had workshops with our different, you know, in the different genres happening at specific times. I did it through the UBC optional residency program, which so that most of it was happening online. And, you know, I learned how to write a novel while I was writing this novel. I don't know that like I said, I didn't take the degree so I'd have the degree. I took it for that, having a disciplined schedule. And also I intended to go there to learn how to write, but I think I taught myself. You know, I got some feedback on different things, and feedback is so valuable, but I really think I taught myself. So I'm working on a second novel right now, and please, I hope it doesn't take 9 years to write this one that I'm working on. So there. Okay. So somebody has asked about speaking about the bonds between the 5 and how they support each other. Well, that was another thing is you know, I have called this a Holocaust story because it is a Holocaust story. It's about the Holocaust that was perpetrated against us as Indigenous people. And, you know, one of the things that I think we're quite familiar with hearing is, in the concentration camps in Germany during the war, is that there was so much collaboration between the victims, and the other children in the school were the only people that these children had. There was no recourse. There was nobody that these children could go to for comfort, for help, for anything. Barely enough to eat, much less, their emotional well-being and their mental health. And so these kids, and this was something that I learned. I mean, I learned from my mom because my mom went to res school, but it was something that I also learned through my law practice, is that um, going back to my mom was 9 years old when she went to residential school, did not speak a word of English. She only spoke Cree. And the kids were punished for speaking their own languages, and punished in some pretty heinous ways. I know of stories of school officials putting needles in people's tongues when they spoke their own language. Just so, and I mean, how, little kid, oh, I'm not going to do that if you're imagining that someone's going to injure you in that way. So what older kids would do is they would learn words. They would learn yes, no. They would learn a basic glossary of English terms and words, and they would give it to the younger kids when they first came to the school, so that they would have like a little survival kit, so they wouldn't get the hell kicked out of them right as soon as they get to the school. People like Kenny in my book is an archetype of the helper, and not only that, but Kenny was the hero. He was, he escaped and he made it, and all the kids talked about him for the rest of the time that they were in the school, because he made it, and he gave them hope that there was a chance for survival. But Kenny was also teaching people how to eat food because they were starving. And this is another true story. A survivor was being questioned, and this is in real life, and was being questioned about whether or not it's true that they were as hungry, they were as underfed as we've heard. And his reply to that was, we ate grass. That this was in the Port Alberni Indian Residential School. And and I have one of my characters, I have Kenny coming across in the out of bounds, but they used to get away with it, little grassy treed area. And he taught Howie, who was eating grass, not to eat grass, and how to strip fireweed for the tender bits inside, and spruce buds, and fiddleheads, and those kinds of things, and how to help themselves survive through those really difficult experiences. So, and they're all like that. There's a couple of scenes where the girls go down and in the night and steal the nuns' food because and this is a story that I heard in my practice over and over and over again, that the staff were so well fed and they would eat in front of the children that were eating like roadkill, basically. And so food comes up in the book as an important thing, that people helped each other to make sure that they weren't forever starving. So, hi, Devlin. I can see you. And yeah, so yeah, those bonds. Is that what you were looking at there, Prince Rupert Library? I mean, Lou?
Well, yes, definitely, and that's really interesting. But I was thinking about the narration of the five characters go in and out of each other's lives as adults too.
Yeah, yes, they do.
I
Well,
was
in one of those,
interested in how they intersect. They support and they understand each other in a way,
nobody else could.
and they interpret to other people for each other.
They do. Yeah, they do. And it's, I think, when you raise that, I think about Clara. Clara was a very persnickety character. She used to talk to me, and literally I would be writing dialogue for Clara, and this voice would come into my head saying, I wouldn't say that. Yes, you would. No, I wouldn't. And it, like, these characters are really living characters to me, right? They're living with spirit, with soul, with needs, with desire, with all of those things. And so Clara was a bit of a struggle that way. But in response to what Lou is referring to, I think about when Lucy goes to have her baby, and of course, who is with her to support her but Clara. And then this social worker, of course, arrives and wants to, and there's some fear that the child is going to be apprehended. So, of course, Clara gets her out of the hospital. She sneaks her out, and she makes sure that the baby isn't taken. And both of them are just in a state of anxiety, thinking that this child could end up in the residential school. And so, and I think it's almost, I guess, like a way to describe it is that they're a unique class of people. They don't have the same experiences as people that didn't have to go to a school, or people that didn't have to experience the kind of discrimination that we see, and that we see occurring throughout the book. And I guess the way I feel about it is they learned that their survival depended on each other in the school. And so when they left, they continued those relationships, because really each other is all they had to turn to. They didn't have anybody else to turn to. So, yeah, so I guess that's what I have to say about that. Rudy just wrote his first novel. Yeah, it's an intense experience. Rudy's talking about his own personal and intense experience in terms of writing his own book. And yeah, it's very intense. It calls on you to feel everything that your characters are feeling, because otherwise you lose authenticity if it's just if you're just talking about something that people experienced, as opposed to exploring those feelings yourself, and really getting inside those characters so that you have the authenticity that makes it possible for all of you to feel for those characters as though they are living, breathing people. And yeah, so that's a pretty big challenge. So, but congratulations, writing a novel is not an easy thing, and good for you. I have a saying about it, and that saying is that writing is hard work. It's not magic, but when it's writing is not magical, it's hard work, but when it's working, it's magic. And that's absolutely true. There is nothing like that feeling when you're going and you're not struggling with the words, they're just flowing. It's an absolutely beautiful feeling. So, yeah. Okay. I don't see any other questions.
I have one. Can I ask it?
Yes.
I'm not unmuted. I'm typing. Michelle, could you speak a little bit about the chapter about the traditional healer?
About Mariah.
That part is so beautiful in the book. I would like the people that haven't read it yet to know a little something about what that's doing in your book.
Well, one of the things that the book has been getting some pretty strong reviews, and I'm really over the moon about that. And I don't know if you're all familiar with Goodreads, but there's a bunch of reviews on Goodreads, and a lot of them refer to sadness and hope in equal measure.
Yes.
And that's I think one of my biggest victories in this book, is that it is with equal measure. It's not, I know those first 3 chapters are rough, but they had to be, folks. And you just get past those first 3 chapters and you'll do well. But one of the things that I wanted to, well, there's a couple of things I wanted to demonstrate. And one of them was where people went in their lives, where they found release, where they found healing, where they found help or support, where they found expression for being really pissed off, right? And, you know, in one of the chapters, Clara joins the American Indian movement and gets involved in all of that, right? And it's a place, Clara is right pissed off. She is so mad. And that is the perfect place for her to seek the revenge that she's actually looking for, the release that she's actually looking for. But oddly, that's not where she finds it. She finds it in a return to a spirituality. And that might be an easy kind of approach, if you will. But the challenge that, so the thing that I really wanted to bring across is that she had to overcome the brainwashing that she got at the school, that this is devil worship, that traditional spirituality is devil worship, that it's against Christianity, and that, you know, you're going to go and burn in hell if you, you know, spend any time in your spiritual traditional spiritual beliefs. And so we see in the book, you will see Clara struggling with that, you know, as she tries to resist Mariah, who is a healer and who was never touched by this experience because she was whisked away and raised by her grandmother to be a healer, which she is. And but there's two things that there. One is that there is the introduction to the spirituality, but the second thing that's there is how much we were brainwashed to think that our spirituality was evil, and you know, a sure ticket to damnation, right? And so Mariah lives off in the Cypress Hills, and the Cypress Hills in Saskatchewan are a sacred place, and that's why I put this there, is that she was living in a sacred place and took Clara to a sacred place. And from there, Clara makes a transition from a raging young woman to an advocate. She becomes an advocate, and she fights for survivors. She fights for people that are struggling in the world because of their experiences that she'd also had. So that's that chapter. So there's hope. There's lots of hope. This book was written for hope, that we can rise above all of this. But I want people to know, and I want people to understand. And I don't presume to speak for survivors in this book, but I speak to them. I want to speak to them. I want a book out there that says to them, you've been heard, and what you've experienced, we know, and here it is, and nobody can deny it. Laura has a question. You have no sound, Laura. Lou, can you unmute? Can you, Iggy, stop it. Can you unmute Laura, please? I can't hear you, Laura, sorry. Iggy, sorry.
Here you are, Laura.
No, I can't hear Laura. I can't hear you. Are you able to type it? Lou, get your techie guy. I can't hear Laura, and I want to answer.
No, I'm trying here.
That's right, Lisa. I agree that, and that's another hope that I had for this book. Lisa just wrote me a little message here that says that this book can very well be used to spark a healing journey movement towards people who are ready to move forward, or so to speak, in life. And yeah, and survivors, only survivors really know. And that's another thing that I did in this book, is that I had another character who was an Indigenous character, but hadn't attended residential school. Can someone help Laura? Where is the tech
Can
guy?
you hear me now, Michelle? Can you
I can hear you now, Laura.
Okay.
Yes.
So
I'm just going to finish answering. Laura, I'm just going to finish responding to Lisa, and then you can jump in. Okay, thank you. But I think you're absolutely right, is that, you know, if you didn't go, you don't know. And I mean, I've immersed my life in this for decades. And so I think I have that understanding, and also from my mother's experiences and my relatives' experience at residential school. But it is the survivors that are going to lead the way. I have no question about that. Okay, Laura, it's all yours.
Well, I was zooming around. I was showing my ignorance in Zoom because I've never had to unmute and mute and type a message. So I was just frantically trying to find that, and I finally did unmute myself. So I wrote, I have not read the book yet, but have it ready to take out of the library. Are any of the characters in the book based on any one person, or are they all a conglomerate of experiences and things that you learned over time by speaking to many people?
They're mostly, like, as I was saying earlier, what I did was, you know, I read hundreds, literally hundreds of psychological and psychiatric assessments during the course of my work with survivors. And so I could look at the assault and the impact and put those things together. And that's what I did, was I took the abuses that they'd experienced, and I drew a character that would grow out of those things. And, you know, some of these stories, one of these stories is about something that happened when my mom went to school. So there's little truths that are sort of sprinkled through the story, but they're all fictionalized. I mean, they're not exactly as those true things happen. But yeah, I drew the experience of the characters from their experiences, as opposed to creating characters and then giving them experiences, right? You see what I mean? So, was it a well-kept secret? Carol is saying, I didn't know at the time how to help in the conflict. I didn't even know there were residential schools in the 70s. Was it a well-kept secret? Ugh, look at my makeup. Yes, it was a well-kept secret, in the sense that what residential schools were is a total institution. And I don't know if anybody in our group here knows what a total institution is. But what that is when there's no oversight, when it is basically the people that are running the school that run the school. And there's no independent body that is setting up regulations, or is observing, or is, you know, inspecting, or any of those kinds of things. So yeah, in a sense, they were a secret. But, you know, I mean, I believe that they were less of a secret than a dirty secret, if you will. They were less, there was, I think more people actually knew about them, but lots of people didn't even know what was going on in there, because there was no access to it. And the children were certainly not allowed to, you know, socialize with anybody or to communicate with anybody. I had clients that, you know, wrote letter after letter after letter to their parents that were never mailed, right? That they never got. So there was a concerted effort to, first of all, separate the children from their community and their parents, and then to keep them that way. And, you know, if anybody had known, you know, I mean, if well-meaning people had known, I guess is the best way to put it, then maybe somebody would have blown the whistle. But this was part of a larger plan. And I think that's something people don't necessarily understand. And that the policy around residential schools was that their purpose was to eliminate the Indian problem, so that there would be no Indians and no Indian department, to assimilate them fully into non-Indigenous society. And that's the reality. That's that's the truth. So yeah, it was a bit of a secret in that sense. Hello? Are we still here? Lou, are we done? You're muted, Lou. I can't hear Lou.
There I am. I said, I
Okay.
think you have everybody hanging on your every word, Michelle. I think everybody is still here.
Oh, that's good.
I would just like to add, this is an incredibly dark story, and you're very passionate speaker about the reality, but there is a lot of humor and hope. Makes, you know, it's not a chore or a duty to read this book by any stretch. You know, like there are some very hard parts. I won't downplay that, but
Well, and one of the things that, you know, is like for all the Indigenous people in our group here today, you know, we're funny.
yes.
We have a great sense of humor, and you know, to deprive the characters of humor would have made them less dimensional, right? And so yeah, so there's good humor in there too, for sure. So if there aren't any other questions coming from our group, I will tell you that I'm coming up to the north sometime. I'm coming up probably towards the end of July, maybe August. I'm working with another author, and we were going to come up and do some readings. So I'll be sure to let Lou know, and you can send a poster around or something and let people know.
Oh, absolutely. You'll get a warm welcome here. And
Yeah.
I know Kitimat's waiting for you with open arms.
Yeah, Judy's been at work there too.
Michelle and Judy were in grade school in Kitimat for all of
Yeah.
you. And the Terrace Public Library, yeah, we'll blanket the Northern Libraries, but definitely do come to Prince Rupert. And thank you so much for being Prince Rupert's first virtual
Okay.
Carol Brown would like you to read again.
All right, let me see what I can find. I'll find a short one here.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. Let me see. Okay, yeah, this is not very long. This is Clara, the Beast. She's such a powerful character, Clara. I love her. This is not long after the incident with Harlan, and they've had their little celebration about Lucy's exam, and but this is after. So I'll just jump right in. And Lily was a friend of Clara's at the residential school. I don't think I've mentioned Lily before, so she's not one of the main characters, but she was a friend of Clara's at the school. Lily's pale face seemed to hover in the air in front of Clara, shaking and shivering on that bench, and once again the rage rose up in her. She leapt from the bench. She's been sitting there for hours planning this little thing, okay? So she leapt from the bench and ran across the parking lot, the rock raised high above her head. With a scream, she threw the rock through the lobby window of the Manitou and then raced away into the night. She could hear the wailing of the alarm bell as she ran. Who the hell would think it had an alarm? She'd run a couple of blocks when she heard the first siren. She slowed to a walk. Just a late night party, just heading home. Manitou? No, I wasn't there. She practiced calm replies to imagined interrogations. She made her way back to East Hastings, feeling conspicuous in the thinned out crowds. She heard the car creeping behind her, and for once she hoped it was some creep looking for a lay. She looked at the storefront to her right and saw the reflection of the police cruiser creeping behind her, then stopping. She walked on, speeding up just a little. You, the cop called after her. Hold up. Clara stopped and turned. What? Yeah, I thought it was you. What did I tell you earlier? Clara glared at him. Just my luck. Look, I'm just heading home. I'm not making trouble. Up against the wall, I warned you. Shaking her head, resigned, Clara put her hands against the brick. The cop cuffed her and put her back in the back of the cruiser. Once in the driver's seat, he looked at her in the rearview mirror. You didn't have something to do with that mess at the Manitou, did you? Clara looked out the window. What mess? Yeah, some woman across the street saw an Indian girl running away from there. All Indian girls should run away from there. They drove the short distance to the police station in silence. The cop escorted her to the drunk tank, its current residents thankfully all asleep. Next time I tell you I don't want to see you, I mean I don't want to see you. The cell door clanked closed behind her and she stepped around the others looking for some space to sit. She pulled the collar of her shirt up over her nose and mouth, nauseated by the stench. Like a small miracle, the only place left to sit was by the tiny slit that passed as a window on the outside world. An old woman with long gray braids sat there, looking out at the street below. Clara sat next to her and nodded a greeting. She wondered why such a beautiful old woman would be in a place like this. As though reading her mind, the woman turned to her. "Look," she said, pointing out the window with a gnarled brown finger. Clara looked and shook her head. "What?" "The little birch tree. Even here they shine." Clara looked again. A little birch, no taller than Clara herself, stood alone in a small square of dirt carved out of the pavement for it. The rain had stopped and the clouds parted for the muted sunlight of dawn. Clara watched as the leaves of the little tree captured the light, shining, silvery, and soft. The old woman looked at her with eyes as black as night and placed her hand over Clara's. "The power of creation is everywhere, in the tree, in you, in all of them," she gestured to the others. "Never forget." The old lady settled back into the variegated shadows of the cell, her deep wrinkled hands folded in her lap. Clara gazed at the little birch, blocking out the restless sounds of the cell. As though no time had passed, Clara found herself back, way back when she was little, walking home from church with her mum. It was a hot, dusty Sunday late in August. Clara walked along the rutted wood wagon path that ran through the heart of the reserve, creating a direct route home from church. Her favorite part of this road, not much more than a trail, was the few hundred feet that wound through a grove of mature silver birch. She ran her hand over the silky tops of the prairie grasses as she approached the thicket, her Sunday school lessons fresh and at the forefront of her mind. Her mother walked ahead, close enough for Clara to feel safe, far enough for her to feel free. At 6, she was old enough to join the rest of the kids at Sunday school in the basement of the church while her mother attended Mass. One of the teenage daughters of the church ladies read to the children from the oversized blue book of Bible stories, the cover pressed against her chest, the passionate illustrations facing out for the children to see. Clara was amazed each time the fishes fed everyone, railed against the injustice of Barabbas being set free while Jesus was not. She imagined herself in the powder blue veil that covered Mary's head and shoulders as she rode her mule through Bethlehem. She quietly sang "Jesus Loves Me" without the words, "La, la, 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 la," as the grasshoppers chirped and the wind sent itself rustling through the trees. Ahead, she saw her mom, Serafina, veer off the pathway towards their house, the hip-high prairie grasses, as though gracious, bowing in her wake. Clara felt a burst of pride thinking about how all the church ladies gravitated to Serafina for chit-chat about the service, how they always sought out what she had to say about births and deaths, namings, and ceremonial giveaways. Clara stood for a moment transfixed by the sunlight reflecting off the shimmering silver-green leaves and felt the earth's summer heat rising through her feet, seeping into her bones. She stood motionless, thinking she heard something, a tinkling, like tiny bells sounding in the wind. She carried on, but heard it again, this time with a whispering sound, almost words, like a quiet chanting rising on the breeze. "Mum!" She ran to catch up with her, then walked backwards, facing her mother. "Did you hear it too?" "I didn't hear anything, Clara." Her mother turned and stood, holding her daughter's hand. The child's face turned to the sky over the thicket. "Listen, Mum, listen." Smiling and slightly shaking her head at her always surprising child, her mother squeezed Clara's little hand. "Sorry, honey, I don't hear a thing." "Mum, I think the angels are playing in the trees." Her mother smiled and turned back towards the house, Clara's fingers slipping from hers. "Let's get moving, girl. Your auntie and the cousins will be at the house pretty soon." "Don't you believe me?" Clara looked at her mom with disappointment. Maybe it was not for others to hear. Your grandma used to say the little people played in that thicket. Maybe they are making music just for you. Clara, confident again, ran ahead of her mum, her braids bouncing against her back. Pick some rhubarb, her mother called after her. I'll make a pie. Clara veered off towards the garden. Clara remembered eating that rhubarb pie, playing with her cousins, and finally falling asleep in her mother's bed for what would be the last time. She remembered all the children gathered at the church the next morning, the cattle truck waiting, the priest and the RCMP standing by as the children, Clara too, were loaded into the truck. She remembered the first time she saw Sister Mary. It was long past dark when the children marched up from the dock to the mission. Sister's black robes were invisible in the night as she stood on the steps looking like a disembodied head in her blazing white cornet. Clara remembered her battle with Sister as she cut her long braids, doused her in green powder, and took her clothes away, replacing them with a used brown shift. Her heart pounding, Clara rose from her reverie and turned to speak to the old woman, but the bench was empty. The hairs on the back of her neck stood stiff, and her face flushed hot as she looked around the crowded cell for the woman, but she was nowhere. Clara turned her attention once again to the little birch, trying to calm herself. When the time came for the guard to empty the cell of the previous night's captives, Clara made a point of walking next to him. Excuse me, do you know what happened to that old lady? What old lady? The one with the braids and the long skirt. She was Indian, like me. No one like that in last night. You sobered up? Must be the DTs. Clara collected her belongings and walked out into the morning air, unable to shake the eerie feeling. Outside, she bummed a cigarette and a light, walked down to the little birch tree, pressed her hand against it, and smoked. Thank you. Thank you all for joining. Thank you. I really, I am so honored that people are choosing to read this and that they're responding in the way they are, with feeling and with learning. It's very, very satisfying. So thank you all for being here, and have a wonderful evening. And with that, I'm just going to check. You're welcome, Devlin. I don't have everybody on the screen anymore. Something happened. I don't know what. So, but with that, oh, Judy has asked, will there be a sequel? Oh, goodness knows. I'm working on another book, which also explores 2 other times in Indigenous history. And I love history. And if I'm still living, maybe I'll do a sequel after that one. So thank you all again, and I am going to just sign off. Bye.
Thank you, Michelle, being our very first virtual author.
You guys did a great job. You did a fabulous job. Thank you so much.
I'll tell Will, and thank you for your beautiful book.
Thanks, and we'll see you when I get up there.
Look forward to it.
Take care. Bye-bye.